Hi, so the next thing we're going to do is establish the nose and profile, and we're going to use mainly the guides provided by Rain Wilkinson and Peters' 2009 article, Prediction of Nasal Morphology from the Skull. And mainly, at least this part from this information, which admittedly is, I would say, quite poorly explained, but I think I have a handle on how it's working. But it doesn't provide the clean results that these seem to indicate. The other thing that sort of troubles me about this, notice how this angle here, coming out of nasion, is at a 90-degree angle from this imposed plane from nasion to procyon. We'll get to that in a second. But later on in the article, they referred to this again here in figure 6, and it's different. The 1, 2, and 3 lines are not at the same angles. 3 is, it's in the Frankfurt horizontal plane, but 1 is not in the same. It shouldn't be in the Frankfurt horizontal plane according to the way that they describe it above. So you'll see that when I go through this process, the results that we get here aren't quite as neat and tidy, but we're going to use it to get the approximate position of pronasally, and then we're going to use the 2 tangent method to get the character of the nose, whether it's downturned, upturned, or whatever. We're also going to look at the shape of the aperture and profile to help us define the shape of the nose, the soft nose in profile. So just bear with me. I'd be interested to see how you interpret this too. I think there is room for interpretation here. You'll see why in a second. Let me just clear my guides. This is what I kind of wound up with when trying this method out. I'm going to clear my guides, and I'm going to select all on this layer and delete. So the one thing I'm going to say from the beginning is I think nasion is in a funny position here. We've got to take a lot of measurements from nasion, but I think it should probably be somewhere like down here. So I think what you're working on should be correct, but for the sake of argument here, let's just work with nasion here. So if we go back to the article and back up to the original illustration here, we've got to take 3 measurements and then run those through some regressions to get some coordinates to find the tip of the nose. You'll see we have to measure x, y, and z here in the first panel. X goes from nasion to acanthion, the tip of the anterior nasal spine. Y goes from rhinion to subspinale, and z goes from nasion to subspinale. We don't even really need z because z is only used for calculating these last 3 measures. And I'll admit from the beginning, I don't understand how they place these points. It doesn't make too much sense to me. So we're going to take it to this level here and stop, which will help us establish the extent of the nose. Although, like I say, it's not quite as clean and straightforward as it's presented in here. But I'd like you all to try it anyway. So let's make those measurements in Photoshop. I'm just going to delete my previous measurements here. So we're going to be using the ruler tool for this. So under the eyedropper, we want to click on that, hold it down, go down to ruler tool. You should have your ruler already calibrated as described in a previous video. You may have to do it again when you restart Photoshop, I'm not sure, but remember that's under image analysis, set measurement scale, and it should be under custom that you set using the ruler tool. Okay, so we want to take those measurements now. So if we use the ruler tool to go from nasion to, I think the first one is acanthion, you can see the measurement is here, 4.88. If we, under window, go to measurement log, here, open that up, you can click on record measurement and it will record that length for you down here, or you can just jot it down. I'm in my measurement side. layer. So I can just hit B and say x equals 4.88. Remember, that's in centimeters. And then the ruler tool. The next one we want to do, we'll just do these two, our y from Rinion to subspinale. Record that measurement, and that's 2.96. So I'll say y equals 2.96 centimeters. And then we can go into Google Chrome. Now you're all sharing the same file, so don't mess it up. The only thing you want to change are these measurements for x, y, and z. Just change these numbers here. So what did I say? Now remember, we're working in millimeters here, so this should be 48.8 in x. And then 29.6. You can see I've done this a couple of times, and the numbers change slightly each time. Measurement error, I suppose. So then we get these results here. And you can see that they're using the y and the x values to run through these regression equations. Not using the z that's used down here, and we're not going to use that because I can't figure out how to execute them really. So pronasally anterior is 21.06. So we can just call that 21.1. It's going to, you'll see that it's not an exact thing here. Now, if we look in the article, it's this value here, number 1. Let me just zoom in. So going from Nasion out in a 90-degree angle from this plane called the NPP, that's the Nasion, the Procyon plane. Procyon is the same as supralabrale in yours, so between the central upper incisors. So we have to establish that plane and pull the 90-degree line out, and that line, labeled 1 here, should be 21.1 or so millimeters. Okay? So the easiest way to do this, I'd say, is go back to your ruler tool and drag a line from Procyon, which is supralabrale in yours, so just between the two front upper teeth, central teeth, to Nasion, and let go. And then hold down Option and then click on the end point here, and you can pull out an angled line. And if you just look in the bar above, up here, sorry, you can see that I'm getting an angle measurement and a length 2 measurement. So now, of course, I can't remember what that measurement was. Let me just pop back in there. 2.1, 21.1. So I'm looking up here for the angle, down here for the length. So I want to keep it around 90, and then get this out to 2.1 or so. Or I could do more exact, 2.06. Or sorry, no, it's 21.1. It's not easy to get exact. So something I've got a little bit long there, but it's a pretty minor amount. So now I can't just mark this spot here, because if I go into my pen tool, my ruler will disappear. So I'll drag out a ruler or a guide from the side. Oops, not a good spot. Actually, I didn't clear my guides. I made a mistake there. So it goes right through that endpoint there, and then another one here to cross over it. So now if I hit B for brush, or click on the brush here, I can just make a little mark here, and that's our measure for this one here, number 1, which is called, oops, oops. Excuse me, pronasally anterior. And then we got to drag a 90-degree line down from that along a certain length. That was our second regression result, which is 41.9, or we can call it 42 millimeters. Okay, so let's remember that, 42. So we want to do the same thing, but now we will select the ruler from Nasion out to this point, and then hold down Option, click on that point, and you can drag out a new line. So I said 42 millimeters, so I want to drag that out and keep it at around 90 degrees. Well, as exactly 90 degrees if possible. It's hard to be perfectly exact. Okay, so the same thing. So now I know this line is parallel to that Nasion-Procyon line. So again, I'll just drag down a couple of guides. Hit B for brush and just make a mark there. Now we have to do the one coming out of here. Now this skull is already in the Frankfurt horizontal. So it could be tipped up a little more. You can see part of the, it's hard to tell. The Frankfurt horizontal is a line run from the inferior orbital margin, the most inferior point, to Porion, which is the most superior point on the external auditory meatus. It's partly missing here, but this one should be calibrated pretty closely to the Frankfurt horizontal plane, as yours already is. So we have to project a line out from subspinally here, a certain measure. And if we look in the article, you can see we're getting, let me zoom in on this again. We're getting 1 and then 2 that we just did, we get this point, and then 3, this measurement out here, coming up here, and they don't show exactly how they relate to each other, but it looks like they cross over, but they aren't exactly in the right spot, but they're going to give us a general idea of where pronasally is. So, what's that measurement? Go back here, 21.5. So we can call this, 21.5 is good, millimeters. So, same thing, we're going to use our ruler tool. Click from the base of subspinally, drag straight out. I can hold down the shift key to lock it in the horizontal, and I've forgotten the number again, 21.5 I think. So something like that. I can't get it right on the 5, but you can see that they're not exactly in the same dimension here. So if we look back in the article, this one comes out and you project a line up, this one comes down and you get a point in space there. So I'm not sure exactly what these two are giving us that is different, but if we look in ours, I'm just going to pull another line over here, another guide, sorry, get my brush tool, and so we've got that point. If we project it up, it would be something like that. So it looks like pronasally is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of this. And if we continue to look at what the article tells us, and we'll call this pronasally, this point here, we also have to do the Gerasimov two-tangent projection line to get whether it's a downturned nose or what. So to do that, we're going to do something very similar. I'm just going to clear the guides now. So now we wanted to the two-tangent Gerasimov method to establish whether the nose is downturned or how it, whether it's tipped up. This is going to be the most anterior extent of the nose, but we also want to know what the character of the nose is. Remember, the Rin article tells us that this profile view of the nasal aperture should be mirrored in the end of the nose, in the soft nose, so we've got some indication there. We also wanted to do the two-tangent method to get whether the nose is downturned, upturned, straight out. So you can see the anterior nasal spine is going to give us some idea. But let's just, again, on our measurement side layer, under the rectangle tool down here, again in our toolbar, if you just hold down your mouse button, go to the line tool. What we want to do is drag a tangent or a line down from the end of the nasal bone, so it's tangent to the distal third, so the last third of the nasal bones here, and then another line that goes in the direction of the anterior nasal spine, as if it were an arrowhead. So we're not following, let me just zoom in here a little bit, we're not following it like this, we're not following it like this, we're going to try and kind of bisect it. Now this is open to a lot of interpretation, but that's what we're going to try and do. And that's what I'd like you to do too. I suspect everybody's nose, their model's nose will be a little bit different. So with the line tool, I'm just going to try and drag out a line that runs tangent in the end of the nasal bones there, and then another one kind of goes like that. So what's interesting to me about this method, and we're following the Rin regressions, is the end of the nasals here tip down quite a bit. So we get this nose that ends very early according to the Gerasimov projection. And if we were just to use that, that's where we would get the nose tip. Here, however, we're getting the pronasale there. So what does that mean? I don't know. Let's just follow the rules as they're prescribed and see what comes up. This is the only way to learn this stuff and to maybe test it, see how the application actually works. So what does this tell me? Well, if I want to try and draw the nose here, and you'll notice that when I made those two lines, made these two shape layers. Keep those in your file so I can see them later on. I'll go to the sketch side layer, and now I'm going to start to sketch this in a little bit. Go back to my brush tool. And so I've got Rinion giving me some example of how thick the nose is there. We're going to find pronasale. And this is a pretty straight out line, so the nose isn't really tipped down. If anything, it's tipped up a little bit. And then we've got, now yours will be a little bit different than mine here. And this shape, as it says, should be sort of matched here. So we want to try and mirror the tip of the nose to match this shape here. So there's going to be some artistic interpretation here. I'm not getting much information from this Gerasimov line. In some ways this method is a little bit strange. In this way, combining these two seems to work out perfectly in their situation, but here it's a little different. So what else does Rin tell us to do? Well, let's go back and look at his article, or their article. So if we just zoom down, and we can go to, now they say that the top of the alar crease, so the wing of the nose here, should be at about the level of the inferior concha Christi, which is the scroll of bone inside the nose. We don't really have that available to us to see in our example. So the other thing that they said they found through their measurements, and let's just go to the conclusion where they summarize all of this stuff. So the nasal aperture should be examined and described, blah, blah. In lateral view is either rounded or angular. I would say mine is rounded, so that's going to help describe the shape of the nose. So the shape will be echoed or mirrored in the nose morphology. Okay, so we've done that. So the heights of both inferior turbinates, Christa conchalis, should be marked on the maxilla, so to be visible, so that we don't really have in ours to see, or I'm not I don't think you can see it in yours. So now we want to place the alar crease. I'm just going to clear my guides here. Now this is a little tricky. In the article they say that it should be, let's see, zoom down here. In profile, the alar crease should be placed approximately 5 millimeters anterior and inferior to the aperture border. It's a little tricky to interpret because they don't really say what they mean by which part of the alar crease. What I think they're saying is that it should be sort of mirrored, that shape, and over and down a little bit. Now these measures are not exact here, but you can see that the general shape is preserved, but it's forward and down. They also say that the most superior extent of the alar crease, so this point here, 5, should line up with the inferior turbinate or conch inside the nose, so this scroll of bone inside there. That's also sometimes referred to as the change of angle in the nasal aperture, which you can see in some and not in others. Sometimes we have the turbinate, sometimes we don't. Sometimes it's difficult to pinpoint exactly what they mean, so or which part of the turbinate they're referring to. So my guide at this point is just to try and mimic this a little bit with some rough measurements. So if I go into mine, I've got my front view turned on. If I just turn off my side view for a second, I can sort of see in my scan what might be part of the inferior turbinate. So if I just, I don't know where to measure it from, but something like that. Turn on my side view again. And then if I were to measure 5 millimeters out, oh, I already did that, so that gives me something like that. So, I don't know. I find this part a little bit vague. So, maybe something like this. Now you've got the alar curvature point. That's going to give you, in the front view, some idea of the maximum width of the nose too. But if I turn off my view, then we've got a pretty good representation of the nose. You can see that even though we did these measurements and we tried to interpret the Gerasimov line, there was still a lot of interpretation involved here, and I'd be interested to see what you do with it. So in the next video, we'll move on to, oh, actually, maybe I'll just draw. Now, how do you draw in the nostrils? Well, there's nothing to tell us what to do here. So I would just draw in something like this. If the nose was turned up, you would see more of the nostril. Turned down, more would be hidden. But later on, when you do the front view, you're going to want to line up that edge with that. So in the next video, we'll come back and we'll do the front view of the nose and line it up with what we've drawn here. Thanks.